The rain on a Monday morning is a special kind of insult. It's not the dramatic, soul-cleansing deluge of a weekend storm, nor the gentle, poetic mist of an autumn evening. It's a tedious, bureaucratic downpour, each drop a tiny, liquid memo reminding you of obligations, of the relentless churn of the week ahead. It was this specific kind of rain that slicked the vast pane of glass behind my desk on the 42nd floor, distorting the Manhattan skyline into a watercolor painting left out to bleed. My gaze, however, wasn't on the city. It was fixed on a small, silver frame that sat on the corner of my mahogany desk, an anchor in the turbulent sea of my professional life. In it, Evelyn and I were frozen in a moment of impossible, sun-drenched perfection. Our honeymoon. The Bahamas. The sand was the color of powdered gold, the water a shade of turquoise so vivid it seemed to hum. Evelyn, her hair a wild, salt-tangled halo, was laughing. It was a genuine laugh, a full-throated peal of joy that crinkled the corners of her eyes and threw her head back in careless abandon. She was reaching for me, her hand outstretched, beckoning me into the shimmering embrace of the sea. I was just out of frame, but my presence was implied in her gesture, in the direction of her joy. We were a single, harmonious entity. 10 years. A decade. It sounds like a monument, a solid, unshakable block of time. 10 years ago, looking at that photograph as it was being taken, I would have told you I was the luckiest man alive. Not in a hyperbolic, cliché-ridden way, but as a statement of empirical fact. I had secured the rarest of treasures, a love that was both a roaring bonfire and a quiet, steady hearth. Now, with the monotonous drumming of the rain as my soundtrack, the photograph felt less like a memory and more like an artifact from a lost civilization. The man implied in that frame, the one about to be pulled into the laughing water, was a stranger to me now. A ghost. To the outside world, we were an edifice of success. Lucas and Evelyn Reed. The power couple. It was a label bestowed upon us by friends at dinner parties, by colleagues at corporate events, by family members in their Christmas newsletters. Lucas Reed, senior partner at Sterling, Hale & Associates, a shark in a bespoke suit. Evelyn Reed, the visionary event planner, a woman who could conjure magic from chaos, turning cavernous ballrooms into enchanted forests and sterile rooftops into starlit wonderlands. Our friends envied our tandem ascent. Our families, with their quiet, suburban lives, admired our ambition as if it were an exotic and slightly dangerous pet. And I had bought into the mythology completely. I believed we were invincible, that our love was the bedrock upon which our twin empires were built. But bedrock can crack. Foundations can shift. It doesn't happen with a cataclysmic earthquake. It happens with 1,000 tiny, imperceptible tremors over time. The first tremors, I now realize, started years ago. They were so small I dismissed them as the normal settling of a long-term structure. Evelyn's late nights at work, once an occasional necessity, became the norm. Her phone, once a tool, became a limb, an extension of her being. It was a sleek, black monolith that held secrets I was not privy to. Its screen a dark mirror reflecting a life I was increasingly excluded from. Our conversations became abbreviated, transactional. "How was your day?" I'd ask, and she'd reply with a distracted, "Fine, busy," her thumbs already flying across the glowing screen. My attempts to connect, to breach the growing distance, were parried with the gentle but firm shield of exhaustion. "Not now, Lucas. I'm tired." The ever-logical, ever-understanding husband, chalked it up to stress. Her business was exploding. She was in demand. I had my own demanding career, my own late nights, my own battles to fight in the sterile gladiatorial arenas of corporate law. I told myself this was a season, a phase. We'd find our rhythm again once things settled. But they never settled. The ground just kept shifting beneath our feet. The late nights bled into weekends away. Work retreats, she called them. Networking opportunities. The phone ceased to be just a barrier. It became a rival. It would buzz on the bedside table between us, a third party in our bed, and her face would illuminate with a soft, private glow, a light I hadn't seen directed at me in years. The excitement was palpable, a crackle of energy in the quiet room. "Just work," she'd murmur, sensing my gaze. "Exciting new project." I wanted to believe her. God? How I wanted to believe that the light in her eyes was for a new venue or a challenging client, and not for the person on the other end of the message. But deep down, in the silent, honest chambers of my heart, a cold dread began to take root. I knew better. And then, the dread was given a name, Ethan. At first, he was just a footnote in the grand narrative of Evelyn's career. A name dropped casually over a rushed weeknight dinner. He was a new client, a ludicrously wealthy tech mogul, a visionary, a perfectionist. He had an endless stream of events for her to plan, each one more extravagant than the last. She spoke of him with a kind of breathless admiration, a tone usually reserved for revered artists or Nobel laureates. I didn't think much of it. Trust was the currency of our marriage, and I still believed we were solvent. But Ethan's stock began to rise at an alarming rate. He wasn't just a name anymore. He was a presence. He seeped into the cracks of our life, a persistent, invasive vine. Evelyn would recount his praise for her work, his impeccable taste in wine, his generosity with bonuses. Ethan found this incredible little vineyard upstate, she'd say, or Ethan managed to get us the new wing of the museum before it even opens to the public. It became sickeningly clear. Ethan wasn't just another client. He was an arbiter of taste, a commander of her attention. He was someone she was desperate to impress, someone she admired. Perhaps a little too much. The first time I laid eyes on Ethan Croft was at a charity gala Evelyn had been orchestrating for months. The air in the ballroom was thick with the scent of money, perfume, and ambition. He materialized beside us as if summoned. He was exactly as I hadn't wanted him to be. Tall, with the kind of broad shoulders that strained the seams of his obscenely expensive suit. He moved with a languid, predatory grace, and his face held an easy arrogance that comes only from a life devoid of obstacles. His eyes, a startling, Arctic blue, swept over me in a swift, dismissive appraisal. It was the look of a man assessing livestock. "Ah, Lucas," he said, his voice a low, smooth baritone. His smile was a masterpiece of cosmetic dentistry, but it didn't touch his eyes. He extended a hand, and his grip was firm, a subtle assertion of dominance. "Evelyn's told me so much about you." The implication hung in the air between us, and none of it was particularly impressive. I forced a tight, polite smile, the kind I reserved for opposing counsel I despised. "Good things, I hope." "Of course," he purred, his gaze flicking back to Evelyn. Throughout the evening, I became a spectator at my own life. I watched him. I watched them. It wasn't anything overt, nothing you could point a finger at and call an affair. It was a conspiracy of subtleties. The way his hand rested on the small of her back as he guided her through the crowd, a fraction of a second too long to be casual. The way he'd lean in to speak to her, his lips brushing the shell of her ear, forcing her to tilt her head in a gesture of intimate reception. And Evelyn, she bloomed under his attention. She glowed. Her laughter was brighter, her gestures more animated. She was performing, and he was her sole audience member. That night, the first seed of true, corrosive doubt was planted in my mind. It was a tiny, malignant thing, but it found fertile ground in the neglected soil of our marriage. After that gala, I started paying attention. I became a detective in my own home, searching for clues to a crime I wasn't sure had even been committed. And the signs were everywhere, once I allowed myself to see them. The way her breath would catch when she spoke his name. Her sudden, fierce defensiveness when I'd ask about a late night. The dismissive wave of her hand, the exasperated roll of her eyes. "You're being ridiculous, Lucas," she'd say, the words a familiar, weary refrain. Ethan is just a client. A very important client. But he wasn't just a client. He was a symbol. He was the embodiment of the life that was pulling her away from me. The glittering galas, the exclusive venues, the world of power and influence where I was merely a plus one. The trust we had spent a decade building was crumbling. Each unanswered question, each defensive retort, was another piece of the foundation turning to dust. And the most terrifying part was that I was powerless to stop it. I was a man watching his house collapse in slow motion, room by room, and I didn't know which beam to brace first. I closed my eyes, letting the sound of the rain fill the sterile silence of my office. The honeymoon photo on my desk seemed to mock me now, a bright, cruel reminder of a promise that had been broken, perhaps long before I ever realized it. I wanted to be that man again, the man full of unshakable certainty. I wanted to believe that the woman in the photo, my Evelyn, was still in there somewhere, buried beneath layers of ambition and distraction. But I wasn't sure. For the first time in our life together, I was truly, profoundly unsure of everything. The rain fell harder, lashing against the glass. I knew, with a gut-wrenching certainty, that I couldn't keep plastering over the cracks, pretending the tremors were just the house settling. I had to face the truth, whatever it was. I had to walk into the ruins and see what, if anything, was left to salvage. Because if I didn't, the life we had built, the life I still desperately wanted to believe in, would be washed away completely. The weeks that followed the gala were a masterclass in psychological warfare, a slow, methodical erosion of my sanity. Ethan's name, once an occasional visitor in our home, became a permanent resident. He was the ghost at our dinner table, the third person in our bed, the silent passenger in our car. Evelyn spoke of him constantly, weaving his opinions and preferences into the fabric of our daily life until I felt suffocated by the man I had met only once. Ethan thinks we should go with the Chilean sea base for the main course, she'd announce, scrolling through catering menus on her iPad as I tried to read the evening paper. He has a surprisingly sophisticated palate. Ethan suggested I read this new biography on Rockefeller, she'd mention, placing a thick hardcover on her bedside table. He says it's a brilliant study in ambition. I began to feel like a character in my own life whose lines were being fed to him by an unseen director. I was supposed to nod, to agree, to be impressed by this paragon of sophistication and ambition. My own opinions, my own tastes, felt suddenly pedestrian, provincial. When had my suggestion of Italian food for dinner become so uninspired? When had my choice of a weekend getaway to the Berkshires seemed so quaint and unambitious? I tried to push back, gently at first. He seems to have an opinion on everything. I commented one evening, my tone deliberately neutral. Evelyn didn't look up from her phone. He just has very high standards. It's what makes him so successful. It pushes me to be better. Pushes you further away from me. Asterisk, I thought, the words a bitter taste in my mouth. The phone was the primary conduit for his influence, a black artery pumping his presence directly into the heart of our home. It was always in her hand, on the counter, on the pillow beside her. She had new notification sounds, subtle chimes and buzzes that I began to recognize as his digital signature. When one of those sounds went off, her focus would shift with an almost physical jolt. She'd angle the screen away from me, her shoulders hunching in a posture of privacy that felt like a slammed door in my face. One night, the dam of my restraint finally cracked. We were in bed, the room dark except for the cool, blue glow of her screen. She laughed softly at something she was reading. It wasn't a laugh for me. "Who are you texting?" I asked. The question felt heavy, accusatory, even to my own ears. Her fingers stilled. "Just work stuff, Lucas. It's 11:30 on a Tuesday night, Evelyn." "What work stuff is so funny?" She sighed, the sound a gust of pure exasperation. "It's a meme Ethan sent. His team has this running joke. You wouldn't get it." She locked the phone and placed it face down on the nightstand, a gesture of finality. A dismissal. "You wouldn't get it." Asterisk, the words echoed in the silence. It was more than just a comment about an inside joke. It was a delineation of worlds. There was her world, a vibrant, exciting, high-stakes place populated by witty people like Ethan, and then there was my world. The boring, predictable world of legal briefs and quiet nights at home. The world she was trying to escape. The paranoia began to fester. I started noticing things, or maybe I started imagining them. A new perfume she wore, something more complex and musky than her usual light, floral scent. A pair of diamond earrings I hadn't bought her, which she claimed were a client gift for a job well done. Her wardrobe began to transform. The sensible, elegant professional attire was slowly being replaced by dresses that were a little shorter, necklines that were a little lower, fabrics that clung a little more closely to her body. "You're dressing differently," I observed one morning as she adjusted a silk blouse in the mirror. "I'm dressing for success, Lucas," she said, her reflection meeting mine. "You have to look the part." The implication was clear. I was part of the life she was dressing to leave behind. The breaking point arrived on a Friday evening. Evelyn had an event, a launch party for one of Ethan's new tech ventures. It was on a swanky rooftop bar downtown. She insisted I come. It'll be good for us to be seen together, she'd said. It's important for networking. I knew it was a test. A test of my jealousy, my trust, my willingness to play the role of the supportive husband. I reluctantly agreed, feeling like a man walking toward a guillotine. The moment we stepped out of the elevator, he was there. He seemed to materialize from the throng of beautiful, wealthy people, his eyes finding Evelyn instantly. He bypassed me completely, taking both of her hands in his. There she is, he said, his voice a low thrum of approval. The magician. You've outdone yourself, Evelyn. As always. He kissed her on the cheek, a deliberately European gesture that was nonetheless possessive. Then, as if remembering I existed, he turned to me. Lucas, he said, extending a hand. His grip was the same calculated assertion of power as before. Good of you to make it. He didn't say another word to me for the next hour. He monopolized Evelyn, pulling her into conversations, introducing her to people whose names were prefaced with CEO or Senator. I was left to drift at the edges of their glittering circle, a satellite to her star. I nursed a whiskey, the ice clinking against the glass like a tiny, futile alarm bell. I watched him touch her arm to emphasize a point. I watched her laugh at his jokes. I watched the two of them, framed against the glittering backdrop of the city lights, looking for all the world like the real power couple. I had been demoted. Later, as a jazz trio played a mournful tune in the corner, I saw them standing by the edge of the rooftop, looking out at the city. The wind whipped a strand of her hair across her face, and he reached out, with an unnerving tenderness, and tucked it behind her ear. It was a gesture of such casual intimacy that it struck me with the force of a physical blow. It was the kind of thing I used to do. Something inside me snapped. I walked over to them, my movements stiff with a rage I could barely contain. Evelyn, I said, my voice dangerously calm. I'm ready to leave. She turned, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. Lucas, it's not even 10 yet. Ethan draped a proprietary arm around her shoulder. Everything all right, buddy? You look a little tense. The condescension in the word buddy was a lit match to a puddle of gasoline. I'm fine, I said, my eyes locked on his. I just think my wife and I would like to go home now. The tension was a third person standing with us on that rooftop. Evelyn, sensing the imminent explosion, disentangled herself from Ethan's arm. All right, she said quickly. Let me just say my goodbyes. The drive home was a tomb of silence. The air in the car was thick with unspoken accusations. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. When we finally pulled into our driveway, I killed the engine and turned to her. The garage light cast harsh shadows across her face. Don't you dare tell me I'm being ridiculous, I said before she could even speak. Don't you tell me he's just a client. She flinched. Lucas, you're overreacting. Am I? I shot back, my voice rising. I saw him, Evelyn. I saw the way he touched you. The way you looked at him. Do you think I'm a fool? Do you think I'm blind? He was being friendly. It's how he is with everyone. No, it's not. I slammed my hand on the dashboard, the sound echoing in the small space. He's not like that with everyone. He's like that with you. And you let him. You encourage him. Her face hardened, her defensiveness kicking in like a reflex. You know what I think? I think you're intimidated by him. You're threatened by his success, by the fact that he respects my work and values my opinion. Maybe that's the real problem here, Lucas. Not him. You. Her words were a slap, sharp and stunning. She had taken my deepest insecurities, my fear of being inadequate, of being left behind, and weaponized them against me. It was a cruel, brilliant move. I stared at her, my anger suddenly extinguished, replaced by a profound and chilling emptiness. I didn't recognize the woman sitting next to me. The laughing girl on the beach was gone, replaced by this cold, calculating stranger who could dissect my soul with such surgical precision. Without another word, I got out of the car, walked into the house, and went straight to the guest room. I closed the door, the click of the latch sounding like a final, definitive judgment. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that this wasn't just a fight. This was a fracture, and I had no idea if it could ever be mended. The days following the rooftop confrontation were a study in cold civility. We moved around each other in the house like strangers in a hotel, our interactions limited to terse, necessary exchanges about bills and schedules. The guest room became my sanctuary, the space between its door and our master bedroom a veritable no-man's land. The silence in the house was a living entity, thick and suffocating, punctuated only by the distant, alien chime of her phone. Evelyn made no move to apologize or explain. In her mind, she had won the argument by turning it back on me, by painting me as the jealous, insecure husband. She carried on as if nothing was amiss, immersing herself even more deeply in her work, in his world. She stopped inviting me to events altogether. "They're just work things," she'd say with a dismissive shrug. "You'd be bored." I was being systematically erased from her public life, relegated to the role of a domestic footnote. I felt like a ghost haunting the beautiful home we had built together, a home that increasingly felt like nothing more than a well-appointed stage set for a life I was no longer a part of. I existed in a state of suspended animation, a fog of anger, hurt, and profound confusion. Part of me wanted to pack a bag and walk out, to sever the ties that were causing me so much pain. But another, more stubborn part, the part that still remembered the girl on the beach, refused to surrender. This was my marriage, my life. I wouldn't let some arrogant prick with a fat wallet dismantle it without a fight. But how do you fight a shadow? How do you combat an influence that is everywhere and nowhere at once? The answer, it turned out, would come to me. I wouldn't have to seek the confrontation. It would march right into my territory and plant its flag on my desk. It happened on a Wednesday. The day began, as most did, with the sterile routine of my job. I was neck-deep in a complex merger agreement, the language dense and convoluted, the stakes astronomical. My world was one of contracts and clauses, of precision and logic. It was a world I understood, a world I could control. Around lunchtime, my assistant, Claire, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had been with me for years, buzzed my intercom. Her voice was uncharacteristically hesitant. "Lucas, there's a gentleman here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment." "I'm busy, Claire. Tell him to schedule one." A brief pause. "He says his name is Ethan Croft. He insists it's important." The name hit me like a jolt of electricity. My blood ran cold, then hot. What in God's name was he doing here? In my office? The sheer audacity of it was staggering. "Send him in," I said, my voice a low growl. I stood up, smoothing the front of my suit jacket, a reflexive gesture of bracing for impact. I walked to the window, staring down at the city below, trying to gather my thoughts, to fortify my defenses. I heard the door open and close behind me. I turned slowly. He strode into my office as if he were surveying a property he was considering buying. He was dressed in a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. He didn't look at the diplomas on my wall or the photos of my family. His eyes, those cold, blue chips of ice, were fixed on me. He gave me a slow, predatory smile. "Quite the view," he said, gesturing at the window. He walked past me and settled himself not in one of the client chairs, but on the edge of my desk, a deliberate and calculated violation of my personal space. He crossed his arms, the picture of casual dominance. "So, this is where the magic happens. What do you want, Ethan?" I said, my voice flat, devoid of any emotion I was feeling. "Straight to business." "I like that," he smirked. "I thought we should have a chat. Man to man. There's nothing you and I have to talk about." "Oh, I think there is," he said, leaning back slightly. "I think we need to talk about Evelyn." I felt a vain throb in my temple. "My wife is none of your business." He chuckled, a low, condescending sound. "But she is my business, Lucas. She's my most valuable asset. And frankly, I'm concerned you're holding her back." He picked up the silver-framed photo from my desk, the one of our honeymoon. He studied it for a moment, a faint, mocking smile on his lips. "Sweet. A real moment in time, huh?" Before the world got big and complicated. He placed the photo back down, but he did so with a slight clatter, a gesture of disrespect. "Evelyn is a star," he continued, his eyes meeting mine. "She has a fire in her, a drive that you can't possibly comprehend. She's meant for bigger things, for a bigger stage. She needs a partner who can keep up, someone who can match her ambition, not a well, not an anchor." Every word was a carefully sharpened dart aimed at my most vulnerable points. He was articulating the very fears I had been battling in my own mind. That I was the anchor, that I was holding her back. "Get to the point," I said, my voice dangerously low. "The point," he said, leaning forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, is that you should let her go. For her own good. She's not happy. You know it, and I know it. She comes alive when she's with me, in my world. With you, she's just playing a part. He leaned back again, crossing one expensive, Italian leather-shod foot over the other, propping it up on the polished surface of my desk. You've had your time. It's over. The best thing you could do now is step aside gracefully. Something inside my brain, some primal, long-dormant circuit, tripped. It was the sight of his foot on my desk. It was the smug, unassailable confidence on his face. It was the casual, brutal way he was trying to dismantle my entire existence, piece by piece, right here in the heart of my own domain. My vision narrowed. The complex language of the merger agreement on my monitor dissolved into an angry, white noise. The world of logic and reason evaporated, replaced by something raw and visceral. My hands moved before my mind could issue a command. In 2 long strides, I crossed the space between us. I grabbed the collar of his suit jacket, the fine wool bunching in my fist, and yanked him off my desk. He stumbled, his eyes wide with genuine surprise for the first time since I'd met him. The smirk was gone. I slammed him back against the wall of bookshelves, the impact rattling a row of leather-bound legal tomes. You think you can walk in here? I hissed, my face inches from his. The smell of his expensive cologne was sickening. You think you can put your feet on my desk and tell me my marriage is over? His surprise was quickly hardening into anger. Get your hands off me, you pathetic little man. I'll show you pathetic, I snarled. I released his collar with one hand and swung. My fist, which hadn't hit anything harder than a punching bag in a decade, connected with his jaw. There was a sickening, satisfying crack. His head snapped to the side. He staggered, and I followed, my rage a white-hot furnace. I hit him again, a wild hook that split his lip. Blood, dark and shockingly real, bloomed on his perfect, arrogant face. He tried to throw a punch back, but it was clumsy, telegraphed. He was a man accustomed to fighting his battles with money and influence, not his fists. I ducked under it easily and drove my shoulder into his chest, pinning him against the wall. Suddenly, the door to my office flew open. Claire stood there, her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Behind her were 2 building security guards, their faces grim. The sight of them broke the spell. The red mist of rage began to recede, leaving a cold, clear-eyed reality in its wake. Ethan was slumped against the wall, dabbing at his bleeding lip with the back of his hand, his eyes burning with a mixture of humiliation and pure hatred. The guards moved in, gently but firmly pulling me away. Get him out of here, I said, my voice shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline coursing through my veins. And he is never to be allowed on this floor again. As they escorted him out, his expensive suit now disheveled, his face marred, he shot me a look of pure venom. You'll regret this, he spat, a fleck of blood landing on the plush carpet. You have no idea what you've just done. I'll ruin you. I'll ruin both of you. The door closed, leaving me, Claire, and the 2 guards in a stunned silence. Claire just stared at me, her expression unreadable. I'm taking the rest of the day off, I said, my voice strangely calm. I walked to my desk, my knuckles throbbing, and picked up my briefcase. I didn't look at Claire. I couldn't handle anything urgent. I walked out of my office, past the curious, gawking faces of my colleagues, and strode to the elevator. I didn't know what I had just done. Had I saved my marriage or signed its death certificate? For the first time in a long time, I didn't care. I had stopped being a spectator. I had reclaimed a piece of myself. And as the elevator doors slid shut, sealing me in a box of polished steel, I felt a strange, terrifying, and undeniable sense of relief. The drive home was a surreal experience, a journey through a landscape that was both familiar and utterly alien. The city streets, the traffic, the people on the sidewalks, they all seemed to be moving in a different dimension, a world untouched by the primal violence that had just erupted in my office. My knuckles were a canvas of purple and red, a dull, throbbing ache that served as a physical testament to the reality of the past hour. The adrenaline had subsided, leaving in its wake a hollow, vibrating calm. Ethan's final threat echoed in my mind. Asterisk, I'll ruin you. I'll ruin both of you. Asterisk, it wasn't an idle threat. A man like Ethan Croft didn't make idle threats. He had the resources, the connections, the sheer, spiteful will to make our lives a living hell. And in that moment, I realized the punch I'd thrown wasn't just an act of passion. It was a declaration of war. A war I may have just doomed us to lose. Pulling into our driveway, the house looked different. Colder. The perfectly manicured lawn and the tasteful landscaping seemed like a facade, a carefully constructed illusion of domestic tranquility that was about to be shattered. I sat in the car for a long moment, the engine ticking as it cooled, gathering myself for the next front in this battle, the one that would take place inside. I walked in through the garage, the silence of the house amplifying the sound of my keys clattering on the granite countertop. The living room was cast in the dim, gray light of the late afternoon. Evelyn was on the sofa, curled into a corner, her legs tucked beneath her. Her phone, as always, was in her hand. She glanced up, a flicker of surprise on her face. "You're home early." Her tone was casual and curious. She had no idea a bomb had just gone off in the center of our lives. I didn't answer immediately. I walked into the living room, unbuttoning my suit jacket, and sat in the large leather armchair that faced the sofa. Our chair. My chair. I watched her, waiting for her to truly look at me, to notice the storm in my eyes, the raw, bruised state of my hands. "Had an interesting day at work," I said, my voice tight and even. That got her attention. She lowered her phone, her brow furrowing in mild confusion. "What's that supposed to mean?" I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, my hands clasped in front of me. I wanted her to see them. "Ethan paid me a visit. At my office." Her face went still. A mask of carefully constructed neutrality slammed down, but not before I saw a flash of something else in her eyes. Shock. Fear. Guilt. It was there and gone in an instant. "Oh," she said, her voice a little too quiet. She placed her phone face down on the cushion beside her. What did he want?" "He wanted to have a man-to-man chat," I replied, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "He wanted to inform me that our marriage was over and that I should step aside gracefully. He said it while his feet were propped up on my desk." Her mouth opened slightly. A tiny, almost imperceptible gasp escaped her lips. Her carefully composed mask was beginning to crack. "You didn't know he was coming, did you?" I asked, my gaze pinning her. She shook her head, a quick, jerky motion. "No, of course not. Lucas, I had no idea. I swear." For a fleeting second, I almost believed her. The genuine shock in her eyes seemed real. But then, the memory of 100 other lies, 1,000 other evasions, flooded back. The benefit of the doubt was a luxury I could no longer afford her. "Well," I said, leaning back in the chair, the leather creaking under my weight. "I handled it." I paused, letting the silence stretch. "Let's just say he won't be putting his feet on anyone's desk for a while." Her eyes widened as the meaning of my words sank in. They darted to my knuckles, seeing the bruising for the first time. The color drained from her face. She stood up, her movements stiff and jerky. "What does that mean?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Lucas, what did you do?" I met her horrified gaze without flinching. "I put him in his place. The same place he's been trying to put me in for the last 6 months." Her shock curdled into outrage. "You hit him? You physically attacked him?" She began to pace the length of the living room rug, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, as if holding herself together. "Are you insane? This is assault. He could have you arrested. He could ruin you. He was already trying to ruin me." I shot back, my own voice rising to match hers. "He wasn't there for a polite conversation, Evelyn. He was there to humiliate me, to dismantle my life, to tell me he was taking my wife. What was I supposed to do? Offer him a cup of coffee and validate his feelings?" "Yes," she cried, spinning to face me, her eyes blazing. "That's what adults do, Lucas. They use their words. They don't resort to cheap, thuggish violence." "My God, who are you?" A bitter, humorless laugh escaped my lips. "That's funny. That's really funny. Coming from the woman who hasn't used an honest word with me in months. You want to talk about adult behavior? Let's talk about it. Let's talk about the secret texts. Let's talk about the lies. Let's talk about the fact that you let this man, this parasite, burrow his way into every corner of our marriage until there was nothing left for me." My words hit their mark. The self-righteous anger drained from her face, replaced by a pale, stricken look. She sagged, as if her own bones could no longer support the weight of her deceit. She turned away from me, her shoulders slumping in defeat. For the first time in this whole ugly affair, I saw a crack in her armor that wasn't a calculated defense. It was a genuine fissure of what looked like regret. "Lucas, I never wanted it to get this far," she said, her voice barely a whisper, her back still turned to me. "Then why did you let it?" I asked, my voice softer now, but no less piercing. "Why, Evelyn? Why did you let him come between us?" She turned back to me slowly. Her face was a ruin. Tears streamed from her eyes, tracing clean paths through her makeup. "I don't know," she choked out, the words raw and broken. I guess. I liked the attention. He made me feel important. Seen. It was like a drug. The confession, so simple and so pathetic, landed not with a bang, but with a quiet, devastating thud. It wasn't a grand passion. She hadn't fallen in love with him. She had fallen in love with the reflection of herself she saw in his admiring eyes. It was about ego. It was about vanity. And for that, she had been willing to burn our life to the ground. The revelation was both a relief and a profound insult. "You could have talked to me," I said quietly, the anger gone, replaced by a vast, hollow sadness. "You could have told me you were feeling unseen. We could have worked on it. Together." She nodded, sobbing openly now. I know. I'm so sorry, Lucas. I was selfish, and I was a coward. I don't know how to fix this." I looked at her, this stranger who wore my wife's face, her body racked with a grief of her own making. The chasm between us felt immense, possibly unbridgeable. "I don't either," I admitted, the words tasting like ash. "But I know one thing." I stood up, the movement weary, feeling the weight of the last 10 years in my bones. The lying, the secrets, the three of us in this marriage? I can't do it anymore, Evelyn. Something has to change. Fundamentally. She nodded again, wiping at her tears with the back of her hand. "I'll fix it," she said, her voice desperate. "I'll cut him out. I'll end the contract. I swear, Lucas. I'll make it right." I walked past her, toward the stairs that led up to the guest room, my temporary home. "Actions, Evelyn," I said, not looking back. "Not words. That's all I have left to believe in." As I climbed the stairs, I didn't feel like a victor. I didn't feel like I had won anything at all. The battle in my office had been swift and decisive. But this was the real war. And I had a terrible feeling the casualties were far from counted. The house in the aftermath of the confession was a landscape of brittle tension. We were two diplomats from warring nations, forced to inhabit the same neutral territory, speaking a new language of cautious, deliberate courtesy. Evelyn, true to her desperate promise, began to act. The first evening, I watched from the doorway of my home office as she sat at the dining room table, her laptop open, her face set in a grim mask. She spent 2 hours composing an email. I didn't have to read it to know its contents. It was the digital severing of a tie, a formal declaration to her firm that she was terminating her professional relationship with Ethan Croft, citing irreconcilable professional differences. She looked up as she hit send, her eyes finding mine across the hall. There was a plea in her gaze, a silent, "See? I'm doing it." I gave a single, slow nod and retreated back into my office. It was a start, but it felt like placing a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. The next day, she booked an appointment with a therapist. She left the therapist's brochure on the kitchen counter where I would see it, the name and number circled in red ink. It was another offering, another piece of evidence for her case that she was serious about changing. But change is not an event, it's a process. And the damage was deep. Ethan, predictably, did not go quietly. He responded to her email not with acceptance, but with a veiled threat sent to her boss, alluding to a potential lawsuit for breach of contract and hinting at Evelyn's emotional instability. The whispers at her firm began immediately. She came home from work pale and drawn, the professional armor she wore each day visibly dented. "They're siding with him," she said one night, her voice flat with defeat as she stared into a glass of wine. "He's too big a client. They think I'm the problem." A part of me, the wounded, vindictive part, wanted to say, "What did you expect? This is the bed you made." But looking at her, stripped of her usual bravado, looking small and defeated, I felt a flicker of the old protective instinct. This was bigger than her poor choices now. This was a predator trying to destroy her, and I couldn't stand by and watch. He's a bully, Evelyn, I said, walking over to the counter. And the only way to deal with a bully is to punch back harder. My words hung in the air, a stark reminder of my own recent, literal interpretation of that philosophy. Not with fists, I clarified, my voice softening. With facts. With the truth. That weekend, I told her I needed space. I packed an overnight bag and drove to my younger brother's apartment in Brooklyn. Kevin was a carpenter, a man who worked with his hands, who saw the world in simple, solid terms of plumb lines and right angles. He was the antithesis of the complicated, duplicitous world I inhabited. He listened to the whole sordid story as we sat on his small balcony overlooking a bustling street, nursing a pair of beers. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he took a long swallow of his beer and looked at me. So, the rich prick tried to steal your wife. You knocked his block off, and now he's trying to ruin her career, he summarized, with characteristic bluntness. Sounds about right. That's the short version. You still love her? He asked, cutting straight to the heart of it. I stared out at the city lights. I don't know, Kev. I love the woman I married. I don't know who this person is. People screw up, Luke, he said, shrugging. Royally. The question isn't whether she screwed up. It's whether she's willing to do the work to fix it. I mean, really do the work. Not just say the words. His simple wisdom resonated. Actions, not words. When I returned home on Sunday evening, I found Evelyn hunched over a pile of paperwork at the dining room table. She had printed out every email, every text, every contract related to Ethan. She was building a timeline, documenting his escalating unprofessionalism, his inappropriate comments, his veiled demands. My therapist said I need to reclaim the narrative, she said, not looking up. Her voice was steady, determined. She said I need to stop seeing myself as a victim of his charm and start seeing him as a perpetrator of manipulation. For the first time in months, I saw a flicker of the old Evelyn, not the one who glowed under Ethan's attention, but the sharp, tenacious strategist who built her career from nothing. She wasn't just apologizing anymore. She was fighting. I pulled out a chair and sat down opposite her. Let me see what you have, I said. My firm has a damn good employment law division. Let's use it. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with surprise. Really? He declared war on us. Evelyn, I said. It's time we started fighting back as a unified front. In that moment, something shifted between us. The tension didn't vanish, but it was repurposed. We were no longer adversaries in a cold war. We were allies in a hot one. We spent the next several nights poring over the documents, my legal eye identifying patterns and potential violations, her first-hand knowledge providing the context. We worked in a state of focused, professional harmony. It was a strange, new kind of intimacy, one born not of romance, but of a shared objective. One of Evelyn's few remaining allies at work, a sharp, cynical woman named Vanessa, agreed to provide a confidential statement. Over a discreet coffee, she told us stories of other young women at the firm whom Ethan had taken a special interest in, a pattern of behavior that was an open secret among the senior staff. Armed with this, we drafted a formal, blistering complaint to HR. It wasn't just about Evelyn anymore. It was about a systemic problem the company had been willing to ignore for the sake of profit. The day Evelyn walked into her office to submit the complaint, she was terrified. I drove her to the entrance of her building. Before she got out of the car, she turned to me. Thank you, Lucas, she said, her voice quiet but firm. For helping me find my spine again. You always had it, I said. You just let someone convince you that you didn't. She gave me a small, sad smile, then got out of the car and walked toward the glass doors, her shoulders squared, her head held high. I watched her go, a strange mix of pride and sorrow churning in my gut. We had won a battle, maybe even a significant one, but the landscape of our marriage had been irrevocably altered. We were fighting together, yes, but I still didn't know if we were fighting for each other, or if we were just two soldiers trapped in the same foxhole, waiting for the shelling to stop so we could finally go our separate ways. The weeks after the formal complaint was filed were a slow, grinding war of attrition. The corporate gears turned with agonizing reluctance. An internal investigation was launched, but it was clear from the outset that the company's primary goal was damage control, not justice. Ethan was placed on a temporary, symbolic leave of absence from his projects with the firm, while lawyers from both sides exchanged terse, threatening letters. Evelyn's workplace became a toxic environment. She was a pariah. Colleagues who had once been friends now averted their eyes in the hallway. Her boss treated her with a cloying, false solicitude that was more insulting than open hostility. She was an inconvenience, a problem to be managed. Ethan, though physically absent, was a more powerful presence than ever. He was a ghost poisoning the well, turning her professional achievements into a narrative of instability and deceit. He started a whisper campaign that spread through the industry like a virus. He told people she was unreliable, that she'd fabricated the claims to cover up her own professional failings. He was brilliant at it, never saying anything directly libelous, just planting seeds of doubt with influential people over quiet lunches and phone calls. The phone calls for new projects, which had once been relentless, dwindled to a trickle, and then stopped altogether. Evelyn bore it with a stoicism that surprised me. The fight seemed to have forged something new in her, a core of hard, tempered steel. But the toll was undeniable. She lost weight. Dark circles formed under her eyes. The easy, confident laughter I had once known was gone, replaced by a weary, fragile smile. We continued to exist in our strange, platonic alliance. The therapy sessions, both hers individually and ours as a couple, became a weekly ritual. In the sterile, quiet office of Dr. Albright, we began the painstaking work of excavation, digging through the rubble of our marriage. Lucas, you feel that Evelyn's betrayal wasn't just about Ethan, but about a fundamental lack of respect for you and your partnership, Dr. Albright would say, in her calm, measured voice. She made me feel like I wasn't enough, I'd admit, the words feeling raw and exposed in the quiet room. Like my life, our life, was second-rate. And Evelyn, she would turn to her. You feel that your actions stem from a place of professional insecurity, a need for external validation that you allowed to overshadow your commitment to the marriage. I was chasing a feeling, Evelyn would say, her eyes fixed on her hands in her lap. And I didn't care what I had to sacrifice to get it. I didn't realize I was sacrificing the most important thing. The conversations were painful, honest, and utterly exhausting. We were learning to speak a new language, one without blame or defensiveness. But it felt like learning a language after a stroke. The neural pathways were damaged, the connections slow and fraught with difficulty. One rainy Saturday afternoon, I found Evelyn in the attic, surrounded by old photo albums and boxes of memories. She was holding the silver-framed photo from my office, the one from our honeymoon. "Do you remember this day?" she asked quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "Of course I do," I said, walking over to her. "I was so happy," she whispered, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. "I felt so safe. I knew, with absolute certainty, that I would spend the rest of my life with you. When did that change, Lucas? When did I lose that certainty?" I sat down on an old trunk beside her. "I don't think it was one moment," I said, my voice heavy. "I think we just started looking in different directions. We got so focused on building our careers, on being the power couple, that we forgot to keep building us." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a decade of shared history, of love and laughter, and now, of profound pain. Can we ever find our way back to that? The question hung in the dusty air between us. It was the question that underpinned every therapy session, every cautious conversation, every shared, silent meal. I reached out and took her hand. It felt small and cold in mine. "I don't know, Ev," I said, the honesty a painful weight. "I honestly don't know." Ultimately, the company settled. It was a quiet, tidy resolution designed to avoid a public scandal. Ethan was permanently severed from the firm, his contract bought out. Evelyn was given a generous severance package and forced to sign a non-disclosure agreement that gagged her from ever speaking about what had happened. It was a victory, but it felt like a defeat. She had won her freedom, but lost her career. With the external enemy vanquished, the silence returned to our house. But it was a different kind of silence now. It was no longer tense and hostile. It was empty. The war was over, and we were left standing in the ruins, surveying the damage. We had fought side by side, but now that the battle was done, we looked at each other and realized we were still strangers. The decision came a few weeks later. It wasn't dramatic or angry. It was quiet, logical, and deeply, deeply sad. We were sitting on the back patio as the sun set, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple. "This isn't working, is it?" she said, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact. I shook my head slowly. "We're trying to force it. We're trying to glue together something that's been shattered into 1,000 pieces. I need to figure out who I am without the job, without everything," she said, her voice breaking. "And I can't do that here. I can't do that with you reminding me every day of what I broke. And I need to figure out if I can ever trust anyone again," I admitted, starting with myself. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't sob. "I hope, someday, we can find our way back to being friends, Lucas. But even if we don't, thank you. For everything. For standing by me, even when I didn't deserve it." "You did deserve it, Evelyn," I said, and I was surprised to find that I meant it. "You deserve to have someone fight for you against a monster like that. I just wish the person you had let down hadn't been me." The separation was an exercise in quiet logistics. She found a small apartment downtown, a place to start over. We divided our possessions not with lawyers and arguments, but with a series of gentle, melancholy conversations. The house, once a symbol of our shared success, became a vast, echoing mausoleum of a life we no longer lived. The first few months alone were the hardest. The silence was a physical presence. I'd come home from work and expect to hear her keys in the door, to smell something cooking, to argue about what to watch on TV. The absence of her was more potent than her presence had been in years. Slowly, painfully, I began to rebuild. I started running in the mornings, the rhythmic pounding of my feet on the pavement a kind of meditation. I reconnected with Kevin and other old friends, the ones I had neglected in the whirlwind of my power couple life. I started reading for pleasure again, not just for work. I began to rediscover the man I was before I became one half of Lucas and Evelyn. About a year after she moved out, I was at a small gallery opening for a friend of a friend. I was looking at a large, abstract canvas of blues and grays when a woman came and stood beside me. "It feels like a storm at sea, doesn't it?" she said, her voice warm and thoughtful. I turned to look at her. She had kind eyes and a smile that was genuine and unforced. "I was just thinking the same thing," I said. Her name was Mia. She was an architect. We talked for over an hour about art, about the city, about the absurd price of coffee. The conversation was easy, effortless. There were no hidden agendas, no performances. She wasn't impressed by my job title or the watch on my wrist. She was interested in my thoughts. We started seeing each other. It was slow, cautious. I was carrying a decade of baggage, and I was honest with her about it. She listened without judgment. With Mia, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't realized was missing for so long. It wasn't the dizzying, ambitious fire I'd had with Evelyn. It was a quiet, steady warmth. It was the feeling of coming home. I still have the honeymoon photograph. It's not on my desk anymore. It's in a box in the attic, along with the other artifacts of that lost civilization. I don't look at it with anger or bitterness anymore. I look at it with a kind of gentle sadness, a nostalgia for the two young people in that picture who had no idea what was coming. Evelyn started her own, smaller event planning business. She's doing well. We email occasionally, on birthdays and holidays. The messages are cordial, distant. We are two veterans of the same war who have found a separate peace. The rain still falls on Monday mornings, a tedious, bureaucratic downpour. But I don't see it as an insult anymore. It's just weather. It washes the city clean, and it helps the things that are meant to grow, grow. I learned, the hard way, that you can't build a life on a cracked foundation. Sometimes, the only way to be saved is to let the old structure fall, to stand in the ruins for a while, and then, piece by painful piece, to start building something new. Something stronger. Something true.